to the cloud.
Mhm.
There we go. And I guess I need to speak up and say hi. I'm Carrie Buchanan. Um, this is coming from the little square that says Mira Schoolhouse on it. And I'm the host, but I am here to only to introduce our actual speakers tonight. This is welcome to the second talk in the Mira Winter Speakers Series. Tonight, our topic is how to travel with a clear conscience and is about being able to experience different places in a sustainable way by being mindful of your environment, including fossil fuel use and climate change, water and waste, and the social, economic, and cultural impacts of travel. We have our speakers with us, Liz Maltby in Perth and Ross Elliott in McDonald's Corners. Liz retired 8 years ago from a career as a biostatistician. And for much of that time, she was able to work remotely from anywhere in the world. In 2012, she moved to Vienna, Austria for 3 years, which gave her a home base to explore the rest of Europe on holidays and weekends. And for 2 years after that, her home base was wherever her travels took her. Her next adventure, inshallah, will take her to the east coast of Canada, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, and the Portuguese Camino. Ross retired from a career in carpentry and green building science in 2019. Then, just ahead of COVID, he left for 3 months in Vietnam, Thailand, Bhutan, and Sri Lanka with his wife, Catherine. Oh, there's somebody in the waiting room and I can't seem to, there we go. Excuse me. There we go. Before retirement, most of Ross's travels involved using conferences and learning opportunities as the excuse for going places. Ross and Kat are currently pulling together their backpacking gear for their next trip, a month on the Salt Path, the Southwest Coast Trail in Cornwall, England.
Oh,
Isn't that great? Now, I want to tell people before I ask them to go ahead. We are going to have them speak for about 40-45 minutes. Then we're going to take short questions until 8 o'clock. And anyone who wants to have a discussion about what they've said, stay on after 8 o'clock. And we will take the longer questions and the discussions and comments at that time. You can ask questions in either of two ways. Either you can put it in the chat and you can rely on me to ask the question, or you can raise your hand when I say the question period is beginning, and I will call on you to ask your own question. So you have those two ways. And just remember that in that first 15 minutes after they stop speaking, we're just going to have short questions. We didn't want to have people unable to ask their question because of discussion that might start taking place or something like that, okay? Now I want to ask everybody who is not a speaker to mute yourself. And if you don't do it or can't do it, I will. I believe I have that power. So if you see me muting you, it's not because I don't like you. It's just because we have to be silent, and you never know what background noise is going to happen in somebody's house while the talk is going on. Okay, so I'm going to now mute myself and throw it to Ross Elliott and Liz Maltby.
Thank you, Carrie. So yeah, to get started, first of all, I want to say that neither Liz or I are like experts in this topic. We've done traveling, and we're probably just like everybody here on this call tonight, or whatever you call a Zoom call. Yeah, we're we like to travel, but we don't like to leave a big environmental footprint. It's not like we're professionals at not leaving any environmental footprint behind, but we're learning, and we hope that some of the stuff that we've learned along the way will be useful to the rest of you. First of all, I'd like to thank Mira for putting this series together. If everybody realizes that Mira is a really great organization for our community building, and hope you'll show your support tonight with a donation to Mira. If you're not already a member, I hope you'll consider becoming one. So as Carrie's noted to everybody, we'll be talking for about 45 minutes or so, and then we'll be taking some questions, and then stick around for a discussion later on. And I'm sure that you'll all have a lot of interesting things to add to the conversation at the end of the evening. So first little exercise I'd like you all to do, as you might have read by now, if you could type in the chat, if you know where the chat box is down at the bottom taskbar, just type in the chat a place that you would love to go to somewhere on the planet besides home that you'd like to travel to. It could be somewhere you've already been to, or maybe somewhere you'd like to go someday. So if everybody could take a minute to add that onto the chat, we'll take a look at that at the end and add up and tally up places in the world we'd like to travel to. So Liz, you've got a few places you really enjoyed going to, or what would be your favorite place?
Well, I couldn't narrow it down to a favorite, so I have actually added it to the chat there, but the top 5, I would guess, would be Nepal, Costa Rica, Laos, Egypt, and the Galapagos.
Great.
Yep, we've got lots of people.
Good. I started to type mine in, but I think it was showing up on my screen, so I'm not too sure what you guys can see. But so let's get started off with the trouble with travel. We all know that travel is something that leaves an effect behind us, and we want to minimize that. So what do you think, Liz?
Well, I think we're all pretty much aware of a lot of the issues that surround traveling. But one of the things that became obvious to all of us in 2020 was how dependent lots of places and people are on travel, on tourism. So when COVID hit and everything shut down, that was a huge hit to the travel industry. So one of the biggest issues, of course, is the greenhouse gases that are produced, and that's mostly with the transportation sector. So hopping on a plane is not very environmentally friendly. Well, pretty much almost every kind of travel to get to an international destination from Canada is not going to be very friendly. The number of tourists can affect the area's water, their sewage. If so many people come in, if you look at somewhere like Venice, they've got a huge issue with sewage, and it's almost all tourists. Tourists tend to go and they tend to spend money, which is a good thing. But not everything they spend money on is good. There are all kinds of negative impacts associated, and we'll cover some of those as we go through. Just the very fact of having, people like us coming in can disrupt the cultures of other places as well. And there's always a safety aspect to travel.
Yeah, I've seen places. I think it was Cuba, you know, where they have these little like half-inch water lines that run down the street. They're not even buried, and that they're leaking everywhere. And that's the whole town's water supply. And then there's this great big huge water main that was leading out to a cruise ship terminal. So tremendous amounts of water are being, you know, loaded onto cruise ships, and their sewage is being offloaded, and nothing like what the local people have for their sewer and water. So that's, yeah, we can really leave a big footprint. So sustainable travel.
Yeah, so we're extremely privileged to even be able to consider travel. Most of the world has no possible way of traveling internationally. So sometimes it's financial constraints, sometimes it's political. I was met somebody from Kyrgyzstan, and the amount of trouble she has to go through just to get any visa is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And there is no country that she can travel to without a visa. So being Canadians, we are extremely privileged, both in terms of finances, time. A lot of countries, there is no such thing as retirement. You work until you die.
Mm-hmm.
So we have the money, we have the time, and we have Canadian passports, which are extremely valuable.
Yeah, I hope, you know, everybody realizes just how privileged we really are, that we can just get on a plane and go somewhere if we want to, and probably won't be stopped from getting in. If we're arriving from Canada, we're bringing money, but usually, you know, when you're traveling, you meet people in other countries and say, I hope you can come to Canada someday. And you probably shouldn't say that, because they can probably not get into Canada even if they had the money for the plane ticket. Very good point, Liz.
So sustainable travel can be defined as ethically based tourism that has more benefits than negative impacts, especially as relating to the environment, economy, and communities. It, ideally, tourism should be a net benefit for wherever you're going.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important, even before you, like just in the planning stages, to try and think about what kind of impact that you want to produce, and where you're going to spend your dollars. Okay, I think we're on the next slide, and we pass it over to Ross, who will show just how bad
Mm-hmm.
travel can be.
Yeah, I was going to mention, if you can manage to travel somewhere and not be any more of an impact on the local environment than the people who live there, then you're doing pretty well. And if you can, you can even travel and maybe have less of an impact where you are than you would if you were staying home. That would be even better. But ideally, we don't leave a negative impact. Make my slide go forward. There we go. Yeah, this is one of my least favorite topics to mention, is this climate change, global warming. There's still people that'll try to tell us there's no such thing, but we're adding the equivalent of 440 billion toasters running 24 hours a day, every day of the year, to just the oceans. So that's the equivalent of 7 Hiroshima-sized atomic bombs every second, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. 15 billion trillion joules per year, or 25 times all the energy that's used by humanity in a year. So that's a tremendous amount of energy. And let's see if this little thing will work for me. This is a little climate spiral that shows, don't worry, we're starting in 1893, but it does speed up. So the climate change, or the global emissions from tourism industry, are about 10%, 8 to 10% of the global total. So that's a huge amount. So it's mostly, as Liz has pointed out, it's mostly the high income countries like Canadians that are driving all of that. So not only are we adding heat to the oceans, we're adding 25 billion atomic bombs worth of Hiroshima-sized atomic bombs on Earth in just the last 50 years from climate change, or 300 zetajoules of energy. That's 380 followed by 21 zeros just between 1971 and 2020. So that's 89% of that's gone into the oceans, 6% has gone to the land, and 4% has gone to melting the ice caps and the glaciers and everything. So as you can see, we're trying to keep this below 1.5 degrees, and we're already over one degree. So climate change is a huge problem. It's, we could do an entire discussion about climate change, but it's a slow moving disaster that we do have time to do something about, but we have to move a little faster. And as we say, if tourism is 8 to 10%, well, those of us that have the privilege and the ability to travel the world should be very aware of what we're leaving behind. And Liz, I think you got some very interesting observations here on the on where that footprint really is. As you can see here, the transport, which is mostly planes, as we'll see later on, is about half of our carbon footprint as travelers. We also see those of us that are out there traveling. We see people coming from countries that couldn't afford to travel in the previous generation, and they're kind of like the first generation that are able to come out of their own countries and start traveling the world. We're seeing quite a few, say, Chinese tourists and Indian tourists and people from countries where their economies are getting better, their income levels are getting higher. They're all starting to travel, and also as other people get more affluence, they're traveling more. So tourism is, the climate footprint of tourism is actually going up, not down every year. So it's increasing. Let me get to my next slide here. So Liz, can you comment on this slide?
Good. So this gives some idea of the climate cost of various means of transport. By far the worst one is a flight. Now the thing with planes is that the biggest emissions come with takeoff and landing. So a long haul flight would not be quite as bad as a domestic flight. Cars, we all know, are an issue. Motorbike is, even though it's much smaller, it doesn't seem to have half the emissions. Yeah, I would have expected the motorbike to be a much better option, but it's not. As you can see, pretty much buses are a good way to get around, trains, trams, mass public transportation. A lot of that you have to be in a city for. And you have to get there. So, I mean, one of the questions is, how do you cross the Atlantic if you don't fly? And Ross will speak to that. He did a calculation that's not on here, but he and Kat crossed the Atlantic last, well, I guess it's the year before last now. And he calculated it was about 212 grams per kilometer. So it's significantly worse than a long haul flight.
Yeah. And also you notice this is carbon footprint per kilometer. So you're going to go a lot further on say the long haul flight, even though it is less per kilometer than a domestic flight. But the long haul flight, you're going to go some crazy distance that you'd never go by any other means, like across the ocean or all the way to Sri Lanka or something like that. So that bar suddenly becomes tremendously long. You'll see when you do carbon calculations, which we might I don't know if we've got a little exercise towards the end of doing that. But when you put in all the numbers, you'll see that the bar for your flight is just enormous compared to everything else, mostly because we're going so far. But even if you drove your car all the way to Sri Lanka, the plane would still be worse. I think, well, no, the petrol car is not as good as the domestic flight, but not by much. But the carbon emissions on the accommodation side is not all that great either. So the carbon emissions for the tourism industry, aviation is the highest. Accommodations are pretty close behind that.
The accommodations are only 6%.
Mm-hmm. But in the millions of tons of CO2 on the exhibit 4, which is by the same people, that gave us 915 million
Right.
tons of CO2 equivalent.
Yeah.
So that's a third as much total. So this could be because more people are staying. The total number of hotels versus the flights. I don't know exactly why that is, but as you can see, the aviation and transportation all takes up more than almost half of it. So that's the carbon footprint of the tourism industry. Now, Liz and I have dug kind of deeply into this in the last week or so, like learning a lot more about what's going on, and everybody says that they're on their way to like net zero carbon. I don't know how they're going to do it. I don't know if it's all just talk, but it seems like the entire tourism and travel sector has a plan. I don't know if they'll stick to it, but they're working on their carbon footprint, and they're headed for net zero by 2050 or 2040, depending on what side of the industry they're in. But there's another aspect as well, aside from the carbon footprint, right, Liz?
Yes, and that would be over tourism, and this is again a result of more people traveling, and everybody wants to go to the same destinations. If you take somewhere like Venice, which is an iconic place, everybody wants to go there. Almost nobody lives there anymore. It's become a sort of Disneyland version of itself. The government there is, they're I think they have now banned cruise ships because that used to be horrible. There'd be sometimes 3, 4, 5 ships in harbor on any given day, and that's thousands and thousands of people walking the streets. I used to go there because it wasn't far away, but before I went, I would always check and see if I could find a time that did not have many cruise ships scheduled. Just the sewage associated. I mean, if you think there what, say 3,000 or 4,000 people per ship, so you're looking at 20,000 people extra a day, and all of those people go to the bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
So it can cause all kinds of problems. And if you go to Rome sometimes, or other places, sometimes you can't even get tickets to go and see what you want to see because they're already booked up, or there are too many people. You just can't get a feel for the place.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the solutions to over tourism? You can often find similar places. So in this picture, this is not far from Venice. This is Burano. It's an island in the same bay. They have hotels there. You can stay there. You could just do a quick trip in and see Venice. But Venice is so much more than just that, the place that all the tourists go to. There, I don't know how many islands in the lagoon there, but they're easy to get to, easy to get around. They have they call them vaporettos, but they're essentially ferries. So it's easy to base yourself somewhere else, so you're not spending too much time in the overpopulated places. You
Mhm.
can avoid going on at peak times. So traveling in the summer in Europe would be a time to avoid for many reasons, including the heat these days.
Mhm.
And when you are there, I've found that if you want to visit sites, get up early, go there as soon as they open, because nobody's there. They're all
Mhm.
sleeping in, and they're all on tours, and you know they'll get there around 11 or 12. By that time, I'm gone, and I'm going to see the things that the tourists don't. You know, if you've got 3 days in Rome, there's a certain number of things that you're going to see. So I go and see all the other ones, which are equally as spectacular, but uh, nobody goes there. So there are ways to get around it. And even something like Pompeii, which is again iconic, everybody wants to go there. Just outside Rome, there's a place called Ostia Antica, which um, is just as spectacular. It doesn't have the whole volcano story associated with it, um, but sometimes it's even free to get into. And of all the times I've been there, never seen more than 20 other people on the entire site. So there are solutions if you can avoid tourism, the really tourist
Mhm.
spots.
Yeah, so that's almost as important as, watching um, your flights, your carbon emissions on your flight, because once you get there, you can put a tremendous strain on the local communities, their water systems, their sewer systems, just their ability to live there. So yeah, back to list of all the things that the top carbon emitters are transportation. So how's the best way to get around? Um, Liz has some experiences of getting around on animals.
Yes, I wouldn't actually advise it. It's a little bit similar to riding a sewing machine.
Yeah.
It's uh, it's very hard. I guess you get used to it after a while, but
Mm,
it's not a very enjoyable experience. A camel on the
yeah.
other side,
Hmm.
camel is very comfortable, unless you're afraid of heights. It's a nice lopey. It's far easier to ride a camel than a horse.
Yeah, it's pretty low carbon emissions to ride an animal, but um, some of the tourist animals that I think this horse looks pretty healthy, but watch out for animal travel that's mostly focused at tourist. Animal power has been used for thousands of years, and only recently has been replaced with motorized transit. So yeah, if you can get around on an animal, that's pretty good. But we do have another animal we can get around on. That's ourselves. Um, and walking, I find is Catherine and I. Catherine has the watch, which I'm sure a lot of you have, that tells you how far you walked in a day. And when we travel, we spend an awful lot of time on foot. And when you're on foot, you actually get to see a lot more, and you can smell the flowers. You can hear the sights and the sounds, and you're much closer to the people, and you really get the essence of the place. You won't see an insect in a flower when you're driving by on a bus. So that's a pretty good low carbon way of getting around. But of course, you can't get from here to cross the ocean by foot. But walking's a pretty good way to get around. Another human powered way is bicycling. So I'm sure we have some bicyclists here in the audience. That's a very good low carbon way to get around as well. Um, Public transport, right, Liz? This
Exactly.
is there's buses in most developing countries, say they have a lot of bus connections. I find if you go to some place like the West Coast of the United States and you think, well, I could just take a bus from San Francisco to Portland, Oregon, can't I? It's like, no, you can't. It's like it's not possible because they figure everybody has a car. But in most of the world, you'll find there's public transportation to just about anywhere you want to go. It's, it's quite amazing where you can get on public transportation in most places. This is a little autonomous self-driving bus that we saw in Portugal. So of course it's experimental, but it would drive up and down the street and pick people up and drop them off, and there was no driver. So that's maybe the way of the future, electric, autonomous, self-driving buses. I was hoping that Liz would find a cool picture of one of those crazy buses that you see in traveling in India and stuff, but we
Oh,
didn't get around
they're
to.
wild. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I do have some. I didn't think to come up,
yeah, we didn't get that to that one. Those are the ones where you take your life in your hands. The chicken buses, right?
but they're all privately owned, so that they decorate them up with it's incredible. It's
Mhm. Have you got much experience riding tuk-tuks, Liz?
I do
Mhm.
tuk-tuks, motorbikes, that especially in Southeast Asia, that's the main way of getting around. I think you'd be hard pressed to find a regular taxi.
Mhm.
And it's amazing what they can do. Like I've gone to the airport with all my I travel lightly, but I still went to the airport with all my bags on the back of a motorcycle.
Mhm.
They're very good at figuring out how to do that.
Yeah, and the tuk-tuk drivers, there's a good way to be putting money into the local economy. We were somewhere, Catherine and I, and we got a tuk-tuk that took us like to the next city, like 4 hours away, which is the rough way of traveling. But we got to stop at a few really cool sites along the way. So yeah, supporting your local tuk-tuk driver is a great way to go. And then that little car there, that's just an electric car that we saw that may be the way of the future. So our transportation will be or just your regular, hopefully a hybrid or electric car. Your footprint won't be too high. Trains, moving things on rails is way more efficient than on tires or through the water. These are some of your shots, Liz. You've done a few trains.
That I prefer traveling by train than bus. I just find them more comfortable.
Mhm.
And some places, so uh, the the picture in the middle is from the Algarve in Portugal, and this little train just uh, puts along back and forth all day long, and it was incredibly cheap.
Mhm.
Um, Not necessarily reliable. I think if you had an appointment, you probably run into issues if you had time constraints. But for tourists, it's perfect.
Yeah, and really cheap, like you say. You're surprised you're on the train you're going for a 2 hour trip, and the conductor comes around and gets your ticket and costs you like $1.50.
Well, I bought a ticket to go from the Algarve up to Lisbon,
Mhm.
and I think it was 11 euros.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah,
that's 3 hour ride.
yeah.
Um, a- and unfortunately, the trains were on strike, and this is again, we could see in Portugal the issues that were happening because of the tourists coming in, and the North Americans, especially
Mhm.
Canadians, buying up property there. And so the cost of living has gone sky high up there, and so that there are a lot of strikes as people try and get enough money to live.
Yeah, that's true. And there's the high speed rail. This is the one in France that we were on, at 296 kilometers an hour, and that's not their top speed. It's another good way to get around. Um, so those are some pretty low carbon ways to travel. Boat may or may not be. Uh, a lot of local transportation is done by boat, by water. So you're supporting the local economy if you hire a local boat, and that's probably not a, really bad way of getting around. Now, there's the question of, is the Queen Mary actually a more carbon, lower carbon way to get across than by plane? Well, it turns out the Queen Mary, when they did the refit, they aimed to get to be lower carbon than a plane flight going across the ocean. That was one of their goals when they did the retrofit on it. But if you go on the Queen Mary and you've got a crew of 2,000 people and you've got your laundry being done all the time, and you go to sit down and to have your meal, and all the place settings are all set out in front of you, then you order what you want. They take away all those place settings and replace them with the ones that go specifically with your meal. And you're thinking, where are you going with all those clean dishes? And they're all going to go get washed, and then all your meals and everything. It's like you're on a floating hotel. So you can't really get across the ocean on the Queen Mary and say that you're burning up less carbon than if you're going by plane. You might as well get on the plane, actually. Even though I think when you compare the engines to the jet engines, it's the Queen Mary wins, but because you're out there for a week, I think your carbon emissions are still going to be higher. You could go this way, because they're going anyways. They don't care if they have a passenger or not. They're not going to wait around for you to fill the cabin. These freighters usually have, do you remember what it is, Liz? Is 6 or 8 cabins?
Yeah,
There's a certain,
it's a small number, and they're the pictures I've seen of them look pleasant enough. I mean, it's probably bunk beds, but there's a little seating area, lobby that you can all get together at. So it's, I mean, but you don't get the entertainment that you get on the Queen Mary. There's no movies. So
yeah,
you
no
would
disco.
use that trip to catch up on your reading and
Yeah.
Be offline, connect.
Yeah, they only take a certain number of people, because beyond that they have to have a ship's captain dedicated, or a ship's doctors dedicated to you or something. So they generally have like 6 or 8 cabins available. The problem that we found, and Catherine and I looked into that, is that it's actually going to cost us more to go on a freighter ship than to go on the Queen Mary. So that was just like, should we be on the freighter? And then they're not in a hurry, and when they get to their destination, you might sit in the harbor for 3 or 4 days until they get a slot to come in and get unloaded. They're not going to go to shore just to drop you off. You might just sit there looking at your destination for a while and say, when could I get off this ship? But I think that if you have to cross the ocean by the lowest carbon way, this would be the way to go. But air travel, we're back to the big bad one, right, Liz?
That's right. So this gives some indication of the kinds of pollutants that an airplane produces, and they all have negative effects in different ways. The CO2 we know about, the nitrous gases, they tend to not last very long, but their effect is huge. Especially over 3,000 meters. It's that's a really bad one. Soot, obviously. I mean, there's nothing good that comes out of the back of an airplane.
Yeah, so it's more than just the carbon footprint.
Exactly. And the contrails are a problem.
Yeah, you got some interesting information on that, about that it's better to fly during the day.
That's right. Yeah. So if you can get a flight during the day, that's a good option. You want to make sure that you don't. If you can get a direct flight, get a direct flight. I mean, sometimes you go to the search engines and you say, well, I want to go to Vancouver. So they take you from Ottawa to Montreal and then stop in Calgary and then get you to Vancouver. And it's the cheapest way to do it financially, but it's got a huge footprint, that one. So this just shows you I guess it comes on another slide.
Yeah, I think that's
explaining the social cost of 1 ton 1 metric ton of
Mhm.
these various gases. So we
Yeah,
know that carbon dioxide is 266 Canadian a ton. By the time you get to the nitrous oxide, the social cost is huge. It's
mhm.
$25,000 Canadian a ton.
Yeah. And you were pointing out that the European Commission says that 2/3 of the impact from plane travel is from uh, the other emissions, not from the carbon dioxide, but from the water vapor and the nitrous oxides and the sulfates and all that other stuff. So that it's actually, it's way more than than just the carbon dioxide.
So
So how do
these are some
we,
of the things
yeah.
that you can do to mitigate the
Mhm.
emissions. Fly economy rather than business because you're taking up less space, so your
Mhm.
footprint would be smaller. Your business class takes twice as space, your footprint's going to be twice as big.
Mhm.
Um, as I mentioned before, direct flights, not not if you can do it, a direct flight is by far the best. Daytime flights are better than nighttime flights.
Mhm.
And
It's
choose
interesting
your
that it
airline
doesn't trap the heat in at night.
exactly.
Yeah, interesting.
Uh, choose your airline carefully because some of them don't care and some are working really quite hard to make sure that they fly with a full load
Mhm.
of passengers. Uh, they're I can't remember. They're two very similar planes, uh, and one of them has much better emissions than the other.
Yeah.
You just have to see what flights are available and but look at the plane that they've got because that can make a difference.
Yeah. It takes a little bit of digging to find out.
And the other thing is the greenhouse gas offsets, and we'll deal with that later on.
Mhm. Yeah. So I think we're going to run a little bit beyond our target, but I think we're going to get
A
into
little
the
bit.
accommodations now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll
So
talk. We'll talk
uh,
quickly.
yeah. Well, I mean, we covered the most important part of it is that's the whole aviation side of it. So I think we can move a little quicker through the
Yes.
accommodation side of things. Um, so hotels and hostels and independent chains, you got some
Yep.
ideas on that.
There's quite a range of options. Uh, sorry, I just lost my notes. I'll just have
Mhm.
to wing it. Um,
Yeah.
Homestays are really neat because you stay with a family. Your impact would be much smaller. You get to learn much more about the country, about the cultures,
Mhm.
everything else. They sometimes come with restrictions, so certain hours that you have to be there. Some require you to put some work in, but that's all kind of a great way to get to understand the place that you're visiting. Hostels are
Mhm.
another good way to go. They're cheap, um, and and you can find quite a variety. I mean, that this picture was one on the Camino, and they try and jam in as many people as they can. So it was
Mhm.
quite often 40 of us to a room. Uh, so that has its drawbacks, but it's incredibly cheap. Hostels generally have kitchens. They generally have wash tubs so you can hand wash your laundry. Um, and it's a great way to meet people and like-minded travelers, um, and get tips on, places to go that you hadn't even thought of. Independent hotels are privately owned. They quite often have uh, they can be really funky. You know, they're somebody's idea, and they run with it. They they tend, well, I don't know. I suspect you can spend a lot on a boutique hotel. I tend not to do that, so I don't know. International hotel chains, you know what you're getting. You know the standard of cleanliness. You know the size of the bed. Everything is going to be pretty straightforward. They're more expensive, and the money that you spend there doesn't necessarily go to the local area. You know, a lot of it'll go back to head office. Airbnb and VRBO and that kind of thing, they're great in one way, because you can they also often come with cooking facilities. You have the space to yourself. They can be in really cool locations, but they do have a huge impact on the local people, because those are places that they can no longer live. So it's caused a lot of housing issues. Even, I mean, we can see that in Canada. I mean, that's part of what's driving the problem in Toronto and other big cities. It's that there's lots of accommodation there. It's just not for the people who live there. And the other one would be camping, which, you know, obviously if you're going to visit Rome, camping is less likely to be an option, because you would have to stay quite a way outside. I have done that in Paris, but then you've got a bit of a commute to get to anything you want to do. But there are obviously places, as in the previous slide, where camping is your only option. That was in the mountains of Nepal, and we discovered that we really should make sure where we pitch our tent, because we found a nice flat spot, but it ended up being right in the middle of a yak trail.
Yeah.
Okay, over to you.
Or you can bring your house with you, like these fellas did. Trailers are, you know, if you have a lightweight trailer, it's good. If you've got a big heavy trailer, you're going to have a much bigger carbon footprint than probably going to a hotel. This is a little video which I'm going to skip over, but what it is, you'll be able to find this online, is some of the stuff that hotels are doing to get certified as green hotels. This one was, can you read that up there? Yeah, Green
About
Key.
Green Key Global.
Yeah, you mentioned that one, Liz. Green Key Global is one certification for hotels. And another one is, which I'm just going to skip over that video, Green Sign. So Green Key is more in North America. Green Sign is in Europe. It's kind of like LEED for hotels. They have targets to try to hit, and they work with the hotel to see where they land now, and then try to get them to up their game bit by bit. So if you're traveling, you can find out. And these actually, I was surprised, because as you can see in the introduction to this talk, is our hotels greenwashing. Well, some of these, at least the Green Sign one and the Green Key, look like they really are authentic green certification for hotels. So make sure that when you do book a hotel, that they, you know, hold them to these standards, and also mention to them that's why you booked their hotel, so they'll keep it up. And this is from Booking Holdings, which is like Booking.com, I guess, owns hotels as well. And they've got a climate action roadmap to net zero, 100% electricity be renewable energy by 2021. So that's using stuff like bullfrog power type of ideas to be able to claim you've got 100% renewable. Well, you can't really select your electrons, but they actually do have goals of getting their emissions down. It's not always as altruistic as it may seem, because energy is one of their biggest expenses. So energy is what causes most of their emissions, and if they can figure out ways to save as much energy as possible, they can give themselves a gold star for being so sustainable. But just back up to this certification is not just about energy or carbon emissions. Biodiversity, cultural heritage, their social responsibility, economic responsibility, and their water management, that's all included. Another aspect when you're traveling is that you're eating local food. Well, so that one wasn't huge on the pie chart of your greenhouse gas emissions. We'd love to encourage everybody to avoid eating meat when you're traveling, or maybe even avoid it when you're at home. But no, I'm not going to proselytize about that. But it is lower carbon emissions, eating lower on the food chain. Also, if you eat like a local, it's cheaper and it's healthy. So keep on, encouraging the local food scene. Shop in the local markets. It's way more fun. You find all kinds of interesting stuff. Things you don't even know what they are. That's part of the adventure of traveling. Is like, I don't know what that is or how to cook it, and people just love it when you're in the markets and you're buying the local food. Take it back to your hostel or your Airbnb and cook it up. And drinking water, safe drinking water. Did anybody notice the news story that was out in the last week or 2 or 3 about all bottled water has microplastics in it, which means all apple juice and everything else is in plastic bottles all has microplastics in it. Well, you don't need to drink bottled water, right, Liz?
No, in fact, it's really discouraged to use disposable plastics, and that's what bottled water generally is. There are ways around it. What I would recommend is, find out before you go whether water is an issue. So I just came back from Ecuador and Panama, and Ecuador you could not drink the water. Panama was no problem. So you can't guess. You just have to do your research. And then there are all kinds of different ways of purifying the water. You can on the left there is a bottle with a filter built in. So you just fill it up, and the suction of sucking on the straw is what pulls it through the filter. And I find if I'm hiking outside of the cities, they're great because if you pass a stream, you just fill it up with nice cold water and you don't have to worry. But I would have to say that at high altitude, it's more of a problem because getting the energy to suck the water is a little harder. So this you can go back and look at later. It tells you about the different kinds of filters and purifiers that you can get. They're positives and negatives.
Yeah, we use one that's like a bag with a filter on it, and we fill it up, and it's gravity, so you don't have to pump anything, and you just fill your canteen up with it. So it does like 3 liters at a time. And then finally, I think this is the final one, is about shopping. The stuff that you buy. If you're buying locally produced items, it's good for the local economy, but a lot of times the stuff that looks like it's local has been made somewhere else and just brought in just for the tourists, so it's not quite the same. Local tours is you're dealing with local people instead of booking ahead of time through an international operator. Is certainly the better way to go for the local community. And also, Liz, you got some really good information on the items that you bring.
Yeah, so if one thing that if you're going swimming in the ocean or a lake, you want to wear sunscreen, you really want to make sure it's reef friendly, because then it will not cause a problem to the wildlife. A lot of people actually wear sun shirts to avoid having to put on sunscreen, but there's and that what they call buffs that come and cover your face. So there are ways of covering up, but if it's 40 degrees, you may just not want to cover up quite that much. Uh,
Yeah,
the
so
other
it's,
the other
mhm,
things are different ways of bringing soap. That so you're not bringing liquid soap or bars that just get gooey and you
mhm,
struggle to know what to do with them. So these are sort of single use bits of soap. You can get the same for toothpaste, um, and it, it it's much better for the environment. And the other thing that I've come across in some places is that people really are looking for good um, clothing and shoe footwear because that's expensive, and tourists have tons of money. So if you're wearing shoes and you know that you're not, I mean, you got 10 pairs at home and you're not likely to use those much, leave the shoes. When I was in Kenya, pe people would, offer really nice animal carvings and stuff that they'd done, just for a pair of old shoes. Um,
mhm,
so that's something to think about, and it gives you more space in your suitcase for souvenirs when you come home.
mhm.
Pack as lightly as possible. Yeah, nobody wants to be hauling bags around. That you know, take when you get back from the trip, take an inventory of what you took and what you used and what you didn't use. And next time, don't take what you didn't use.
Yeah, that's a good one. You end up coming back and realize you just took stuff all the way there and back and didn't use it. Um, and animal experiences, there's a whole thing about that is this I'm sure that you're at just an elephant orphanage you're at, Liz?
No, it was a rescue. So most of these
Hmm.
elephants have been badly treated. They were used in the tourist industry to give
Hmm.
people rides, which is really not good for the elephant.
Right.
So there are a number of these. This one's in Thailand, and they rescued these. You pay to go. You spend a day learning about what they eat. You learn all about the animals. You get to, in this case, you get to jump in the pond with them and scrub their backs and whatever. And the money that they get from this allows them to feed the animals and keep them safe.
Hmm. Yeah. And so you really have to pay attention to what you're supporting because some of these, the riding elephants or swimming with dolphins and all that stuff is really damaging to the the animals, to the environment, and definitely something we don't want to have. We don't want tourists traveling the world and making the world a worse place for people. Same thing for aquariums or zoos. Um, that's I don't know if there are very many really ethical zoos. I think some of the aquariums are research and they take good care of what they're entrusted with, but others are tourist attractions where their things are not properly cared for. So it's important to choose your activities carefully. Local culture, customs, and communications, there's a really important one. You want to benefit your communities. And when you come there, you want to bring your money and help to support good jobs and income for the people who live there without affecting their lifestyle to the point where they're not actually having much more of a life than serving tourists. So, um, for example, taking photos of people. Uh, you're going to see lots of really interesting sights, and people are not animals in a zoo for you to take pictures of. You ask them if you could take their picture, and if these guys particularly would like very much if you donated some money as well as took their picture. You will find some hustlers though that want you to take their picture so you can get out your money. So you got to be a little cautious. So that's a whole other topic we could talk about safety, but that's another thing. But yeah, just running around taking pictures of people as if they're subjects for to show on your Instagram video or something is not the way to travel. Ask permission. And Liz, this was your slide about strutting your stuff, leave your valuables at home. I think there's more to that than just you don't want to get robbed, right?
Exactly. Well, I mean, one thing you don't want to do is to show off to people who have no possible chance of having that kind of fancy stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just the awareness that your cell phone alone is more than they'll make in a couple of months of work. So, people sometimes aren't aware of just how it looks for them to be traveling around with thousands of dollars hanging around their neck and being completely unaware of who they're around. So it's not just about being, having valuables in sight, because you want to try to look more like a local than somebody who just flew in from somewhere rich. So you want to go as local as you can, eat like a local, learn what behaviors are culturally unacceptable, and finally, definitely learn some basic words and phrases in the local language. That'll go an awfully long ways to getting a good smile from people, and they're willing to help you. And most places, they don't mind that you're slaughtering the language if you're at least trying. There's 10 or 20 basic words that you should know in every country when you go somewhere, just to show that you're respectful of their local language. And then, well, here's a really big section, which we'll try to get through rather quickly, is what carbon offsets. I'm sure there's a few people right now rolling their eyes and saying, oh, carbon offsets, like they say, the indulgence, like they used to pay the Catholic Church for your sins. But at the same time, as this article from Yale Environment 360 shows, if you read the whole article, it's actually, we don't really have another tool. The other tool is to stay home. Don't fly. But if you're going to fly, yes, it definitely does help to do those carbon offsets. A CBC on the left saying the carbon offsets can do more harm than good. But the idea, particularly for industry, to say, well, we'll just plant some trees and we'll emit even more than we ever have, that's not really the way to go. It's when you have to emit carbon anyways that you should try to compensate for it in a meaningful way. And there are some meaningful ways. Right, Liz?
Right. So the first thing to do is to figure out how much your impact is. So the Canadian government has officially set the carbon at $266 Canadian a ton. Other greenhouse gases have different social costs.
$75,000 a ton for
Yeah,
nitrogen oxide.
This is a moving target, right? Because
Yeah.
Every week we discover something else that's damaging, right? So I'm guessing the real social cost is much higher than what the government has set it at.
Yeah, for sure. So really, these numbers are just to be taken as minimums. So when you get into having to calculate your offset, you can there's some good websites. Some of them are better than others. Some of them calculate your entire trip, what you're going to eat. There's one for Montreal. If you go to the Montreal tourism website, they have a carbon calculator. You tell them where you're coming from, how you're traveling, what kind of place you're staying at, what kind of food you eat. They'll even give you a better deal on your carbon footprint if you're a vegetarian. And it'll calculate what your carbon footprint is for your trip, and then you can offset it. Now, when you offset it, like say on some airlines, or most airlines now, will give you the option on your ticket to pay for your carbon emissions right there. But what are they doing with that money? Is it right there. See, they might be focused on tree planting, for example. So paper company comes in and clear cuts the forest, and then the airline pays to replant the trees. It doesn't seem like it's really doing much good. But so you can go, for example, to climateandtravel.org, and you can do a calculation. I figured out what it would be for two people going from McDonald's Corners even directly and to London, Ontario, London, UK. And you can put in a whole lot of details about your trip and figure out what your carbon footprint is. So this is Liz's carbon footprint, right? This is one trip.
Yeah. So it's an example of two trips. So one's
Two
going
different
to
trips. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one's going to Vancouver, and that's almost 1.5 tons of carbon dioxide that's emitted.
Mm-hmm.
If you go on a cruise, it's more than more than twice
Mm-hmm.
that. there's, according to the US government, in order to stop climate change, the maximum amount per person per year, it would be 0.6 tons of
Mhm.
carbon dioxide, which the average amount produced by a single Canadian is 17.8.
Yeah. So then if we
So
jump on a plane and do another 1.5 or 2 tons, that
it,
really starts to, that's another 10%
yes,
rather than
it's
reducing.
a little terrifying.
Yeah, yeah. So travel has got a huge effect. And as they say right here on this plane ticket here, they say, well, but you'd like to offset your booking. And if they're $39.26, you can offset 1,481.76 kilograms of CO2. And you just tack that onto your plane ticket and you feel so much better about it. But what you could also do is you can calculate up here, or on the, where's that carbon calculating one? Calculate your footprint using the Canadian government numbers or higher numbers, whichever ones you want to go by, and then consider donating to a local organization such as Climate Network Lanark or Guatemala Stove Project. I added a little snide remark over here about carbon offsets. Greta Thunberg sailed across the Atlantic with a crew of 6, and they all had to fly across the ocean to connect with her boat. So she really could have just got on a plane and flown across the Atlantic and had a lot smaller carbon footprint than the sailboat. But anyways, so there's really not, no matter how well intentioned any of us are, we really can't travel without a carbon footprint. So you could figure out how much money you would be giving to Air Canada or through, their climate action organization or any of the other ones, and you could perhaps donate it to Guatemala Stove Project. And they've got Liz, you went through that calculation, how much you bought 3 stoves, I think, didn't you say?
Well, I bought 2 stoves to offset the trip to the Galapagos. Now
Yeah.
they claim that each stove will save between 2 and 3 tons of carbon a year.
Mm-hmm. So
In addition, it improves the health and everything of the people. So I mean, it's a win-win-win.
yeah. So even if you quibble with their calculation of how much carbon that they save, if you're going to do triple what what they save, you must be doing better than paying $39 on your plane ticket and the
and this
carbon reduction.
continues from year to year, right? So if it's
Yeah,
from
yeah, for sure.
10
Yeah.
years,
Mm-hmm.
it's possibly 20 tons of carbon that's
Yeah.
no longer being put in.
And also in that particular organization, other people see the stoves and then they make them themselves, even without the help from the Guatemala Stove Project, because they set the example and others follow. So yeah, it's got a big spin-off effect. Somebody suggested that I mention the Mississippi Madawaska Land Trust. By putting this land into trust in our local community, we keep a lot of carbon sinks operational that otherwise could be drained and be emitting carbon. So we protect the land in our local community. I like this organization, Take 3 for the Sea. They say every time you go to the beach, take 3 pieces of plastic back with you. That's where Take 3 comes from. And they're a charity that does great work on getting plastic out of the ocean. So there's another place you might want to donate money to, or a Well-Fed World that helps to provide plant-based foods to people in developing countries, which is also lower carbon. So there's ways that you can donate your money, like for Climate Network Lanark, that will do things for the environment. So but you shouldn't just get on a plane and fly and not have any consideration for what you're doing to the environment and not do anything in return to compensate. Because as I said in the beginning, it's not a scam. It would be better perhaps to stay home than to fly. But if you are going to fly, the least you can do is offset your footprint. And Liz, you had this about the gold standard
Yeah,
for
so
carbon offsets.
this is a company who specializes in carbon credits, and the Suzuki Foundation recommends them, and they if you want to go sort of outside of the local area, then this is supposed to be a good one. I've never used it. personally, I would prefer to put my money locally.
Mhm. Yeah, but if you are going to, make sure that your carbon offsets are actually doing some good. So as your final tips for reducing your carbon footprint, do your research, see which airlines or other forms of transportation are really trying to do something about it. Same thing with hotels, and the shorter the trip, the greener it is. Direct flights, as we mentioned before, is better than multiple stops along the way, and then offset your carbon. And then finally, a couple of just miscellaneous travel tips, right, Liz?
Yeah, so these are things if you're traveling, I found really helpful. I mean, it's really these days important to get travel insurance. 3 times in the last decade, I've had to cancel trips. 2 of them health related, one was pandemic related. So um, that's important. Get medical coverage, including repatriation. It's not something anybody wants to think about, but on the other hand, if it does happen to you, it's an important thing to have. I always have a
Well, only
photocopy
once.
or a PDF on my phone um, of all my important documents. I always take a power bank so I don't run out of juice from my phone. And I take a spare phone because you can see what happened when my
Mhm.
phone hit a sharp piece of lava uh, in November. And and the phone these days is your lifeline. It's got your plane tickets on. It's got everything. Everything is on that phone. So if you have a backup, it can be really invaluable. Um, we'll, SIM cards and eSIMs, we won't get into that. I always carry a spare credit and debit card from a different institution for emergencies. First aid kit. And I always have a bit of rope, tape, and carabiner with me, and almost every trip they all get used.
Mhm.
And check the local electrical voltage and the type of outlet.
Mhm.
And of course, check the government website to see if there's any issues with where you're traveling.
Yeah.
Make
And
sure
vaccinations.
exactly. Make sure you've got the vaccinations that are recommended, and also take good insect repellent if you're heading to the tropics, because mosquitoes have all kinds of really nasty diseases. Um,
Yeah, you've had dengue, right?
yes, I learned the hard way that you really need to. So, but malaria, dengue, Zika, yellow fever, all those really yummy things, they're all
Mhm.
transmitted by mosquitoes.
Yeah. Good tips. So we'll wrap it up. This little infographic is just kind of a summary of all the things we talked about. Um, that's So the 5 ways to be sustainable in traveling: being mindful of your transportation, be aware of your environmental consequences of your social activities, and contribute to local communities. Um, don't use use reusable water bottles. Don't use plastic waste, and use eco-friendly accommodations like Green Key certified hotels. So yeah, we've covered all of that stuff. So what are the barriers? We'll talk about that when we open up the microphones here in a second. First we'll have questions, and then we'll have to have more discussion. We're running a little late, but we'll make it quick. So it seems like the biggest barrier is a lot of people think it's going to be more expensive, but as hope we didn't really spend a lot of time on it. But if you're traveling more local and not like a tourist, but more like a local person, you'll actually end up traveling for pretty cheap. So it's not more expensive to travel with as a sustainable traveler. So any last minute wrap ups you want to add to that, Liz?
Uh, yes, we asked everybody where they wanted to go, and there's
Mm-hmm.
not an awful lot of overlap. Fogo Island and the UK come out as there were 2 people wanted to go to each of those, but it covers the gamut from Bhutan, Vietnam, Fogo Island, Antarctica, Churchill, Manitoba, the UK, Southeast Asia, Portugal. It's
Yeah. Can you see that on my screen?
I just wrote it down
It's
on a
in the
piece of
chat.
paper.
Is it?
It's all in the
Okay.
chat.
Yeah, I just wondered if I've just put it up in the middle of my screen. I don't know if you can see
Oh,
it. Maybe
no, we
it's,
can't see that.
you
No.
can't see
But
that.
if
Okay,
people
so yeah,
want to look in the
But
chat,
everyone
yeah,
can do that.
they can click on the little chat icon down below
yeah.
and see anything that's in the chat.
Okay.
Okay.
So Carrie, can we open it up for questions?
We can. I wanted to ask Kat to do a quick thank you to you guys. I think she's the one who invited you to speak.
She's the one that got us into it.
And then I have a couple of things. There was one that came up in the chat. I have a couple things that I want to ask. There are no other questions there in the chat now, but if anyone wants to add any, please do so, or you can, when we finished all this, put your hand up and I will call on you. All right, so Kat, maybe Ross, you can stop sharing your screen. I totally agree with this becoming a Mira member. And we hope everybody will give a donation and possibly become a member of Mira. That's a wonderful idea. Thank you. But
Yeah.
if you could stop sharing your screen, then we can all see each other.
Okay.
And over to you, Kat.
Okay, thank you so much, Liz and Ross. We all certainly learned a lot, and I know we'll all be much better, more sustainable travelers because of this talk. So let's get some questions going on and then discussion.
And I'm going to do the first two questions, and other people put your hands up if you have questions. One of the things I noticed about this talk is there weren't a lot of questions because you were answering them. And I wondered if you would be willing to share your slides if people asked, because they are just chock full of information. And I know you did a lot of research and knew a lot already about this. But if there's, are they PowerPoint slides or what are they?
Yeah, it's PowerPoint. So we can turn it into a PDF if that's, maybe that's smaller.
Exactly. That's probably easiest for people. And if they want to reach
Mhm.
out to Mira, when they reach out for a recording,
Mhm.
if you reach out to Mira for a recording, you could also ask for the slides and they will send you a PDF with the slides, and then they're just chock full of information. I'm definitely going to do that. The other thing that was asked in the chat, the one other question was, is there a list of airlines that are good and ones that are bad in terms of sustainable, paying attention to sustainability?
I think the problem is it's a moving target. What the number one airline this week may not be the number one airline next week. So I think you just have to.
Right.
Yeah. The other problem I found was we're just planning, as you say, to go on the Southwest Coast Trail in England. So but how do you get across the ocean? We could take a freighter, but when that might take 2 weeks. But so then we're just gonna bite the bullet and fly. So I started looking into all these airlines and different planes and all of this stuff, but then you get down to it, there's really only, a couple of choices. So you kind of like, if you got Lufthansa and you got I think the other one was Air France and the other one was Air Canada, but then you look it up and it's actually the same plane. It's they're all they fly under the same, under different names, but it's the same plane. It's the same schedule. So you're kind of stuck. It's good to try and find out if you have a choice between one and another to go with the one that's got the lowest footprint. But unfortunately, well, it'd be good if you could just choose to go somewhere that has the lowest footprint rather than try to shoehorn the lowest airline into where you want to go. Anyways, yeah. Another question?
I'm going to stop the recording because I think people might be able to speak more freely if we do that.